Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful Creator. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace and blessings upon each and every single one of you, and good morning. My name is Afaf Nasher, spelled A-F-A-F, last name N-A-S-H-E-R. I am with the Council on American Islamic Relations New York chapter, otherwise known as CAIR-NY. We are a Muslim-led civil rights organization who lives essentially to defend, empower, and advocate for the Muslim community. And amongst the things we defend and empower and advocate for are changes and opposition to racism, Islamophobia, and of course, all kinds of discrimination that manifests itself in all different types of settings, whether it's the school, whether it's the streets, or whether it's in the workplace, or whether it's in agencies and institutions, including places like the airport or transportation. My brothers and my sisters, I want to start by thanking each and every single one of you for making it here. This is an important topic. It is really important that we address both the discrimination that is perpetuated by individuals, but also by systems against Muslim Americans, and understand how it manifests itself and what resources and changes we need to make in order to address those issues. CAIR-NY set out on a goal, and that goal was to understand the prevalence of hate crimes, to bring data behind it as evidence, because we all know that it happens every single day, but we needed all of you to know that it happens every single day, and to understand whether or not the Muslim community reports those hate crimes and bias incidents as they should. Now, the results of the survey will be discussed at length by those of my colleagues who will talk about certain statistics. But what we need to understand and begin with is that stats are numbers, but what we're talking about are real human lives. You know, it's important to bring humanity into this because people are impacted in a way that reverberates throughout their entire lifetime. My very first case in CAIR-NY was the double homicide in Ozone Park that was prosecuted as a hate crime that many years ago. And unfortunately, I've been in hospital rooms in which people are crying tears as their loved ones have tubes down their throat, as they have broken eye sockets and broken bones throughout their body. And all they can say is, why did this happen? We're good people. All we do is go about our business, we go to the masjid, we give back to the community. Why did this happen? You know, that question reverberates again and again and again, but understand that even the most extreme cases like the ones I talked about are extreme in many different ways. You don't have to be in a hospital bed to remember the kinds of discrimination and racism and Islamophobic rhetoric and actions that take place against you. My very first incident towards myself actually was with my family members, and I just happened to be walking down the street with my daughters, and someone yelled out a slur and said, "Go back to where you came from." My first instinct was to turn around and to look at my daughter, who was 6 at the time. I knew she would never forget that incident, and forever it made her understand that being a Muslim in America, and particularly here in New York, is something that although we tell her to be proud of, others weaponize against her. That is something we need to change in society. To understand that, we must understand the problem. And that is why we launched this survey and why we're talking about its results. I want to get right into the speakers because we want to make this succinct and respect everyone's time. We will stay here for questions afterwards about the report itself or anything else that you need clarified. And of course, the report will be available in digital format. We have some hard copies as well. So, to begin the press conference with the first mandator, we are going to go to Brother Ahmed Mohammed, who is CAIR-NY's legal director.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Ahmed Mohammed. I'm the legal director at CAIR-NY. Hate is on the rise in our city. And we have an obligation as Muslims, as community members, as New Yorkers, to root out this hate from every corner of our city. And unfortunately, the data in this report shows that Muslims, especially for the past 2+ decades, have been targeted systemically and on an individual level. The data is startling. 64% of Muslims say they have experienced either a bias incident, a hate crime, or both. And for women in our community, that number rises to 75%. 75% of Muslim women have experienced a bias incident, a hate crime, or sadly, in some occasions, both. Now, when we started this survey, we wanted to make sure that we captured the prevalence. Second. There we go. Still good? So when we started this survey, we wanted to make sure that we captured the prevalence of hate and bias incidents that Muslims were facing. Where these hate incidents and bias incidents were happening throughout our city. Let's do this. Go ahead. We're gonna get a lit assist. Don't worry. We'll start from the top, at least with respect to that. All right. When we set out to do this hate report titled Feeling the Hate, Bias and Hate Crimes Experienced by Muslim New Yorkers, we wanted to make sure that we captured the prevalence of hate crimes and bias incidents impacting the Muslim community, where these incidents were happening throughout our city, and whether Muslims in New York were reporting to law enforcement, and if they weren't, why they were too afraid. Why are they underreporting these incidents? And then lastly, we wanted to make sure that this report was constructive. So we offered recommendations to law enforcement, city officials, city council included, and community-based organizations throughout the city. What we found is that 64% of Muslims have experienced a hate incident, either bias or hate crime. Most of the incidents happen in public transportation, which accounted for 44% of incidents. And shockingly, 34% of incidents happened in our educational institutions, in our public school systems. And 32% of individuals said that the individual being targeted was a minor. 32% were students. 4% of Muslims who have been targeted by a hate crime reported it to law enforcement. I want to repeat that again. Only 4% of Muslims facing a hate crime reported that hate crime to law enforcement. Why? That's what we wanted to get down to. Why were Muslims underreporting so drastically? And in this report, they told us why. They said that they didn't trust law enforcement. They said that they were afraid to go to law enforcement. A large majority of Muslims said that they didn't believe law enforcement would do anything about it, that reporting was not productive. Now, the city, the NYPD, has an opportunity here to respond with positive change. Muslim New Yorkers, like every single New Yorker living in this city, is part of the fabric of this city. We love this city. But we're asking law enforcement to make some changes. And it starts with transparency and accountability. You cannot profile and surveil a community on the basis of religion for over a decade and not provide transparency, not provide accountability, an explanation of how far this surveillance went into infiltrating our communities. How can we regain our sense of trust if you will not be open and straightforward with us? That is fundamental. And we're asking law enforcement to do that. Take that first step to rebuild that trust with our community. And you have to be honest and open. Unjust surveillance practices have to come to an end. Working with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and harassing our community members at their homes, at the airports, has to stop. But I said earlier, 34% of incidents are happening in schools, which means the City Council and the Department of Education have a role to play here. We have asked the City Council to mandate that the Department of Education implement religious diversity curriculum to all school level students. It is important that students know what Islamophobia is. It is important to tackle hate at an early level. It is important that students know what Islam is, to be open to what Islam stands for. Islam is anti-racism based religion. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on his last sermon, warned us about the hate and the bigotry that we are seeing today in all corners of our society. And it's important that school children and all of us know that. We have other recommendations and proposals for the city, government agencies, for community-based organizations. We hope that they will take this report. We hope that they'll read it carefully and they'll implement some of our recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Ahmed. All right, next up, to keep the ball moving, is one of our co-authors of the report, and that is Brother Asad.
Greetings to all those in attendance today. I greet you with the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asad Dandia. I'm a co-author of the report, which took a whole year to culminate after a result of tens of trainings and workshops that we delivered to the Muslim community. And it is my great honor to join our esteemed colleagues, allies, and comrades in presenting it to you today. New York City has the largest and most diverse Muslim community in North America. The numbers say somewhere near 800,000, but I suspect that there are a lot more. During my time administering the survey, I met with dozens of community leaders, from imams to chaplains to professionals to people working in various industries across all social classes and racial backgrounds. And yet, across all of this rich diversity and difference, many of their experiences remain the same. Muslim women who had their hijab pulled. Muslim employees denied prayer accommodations at the workplace despite their colleagues receiving similar breaks. Muslim students in public schools being bullied and not having their teachers do anything about it out of fear. And most painful of all, discrimination perpetrated at the hands of law enforcement. Just this week, as I was preparing this speech, quite literally 2 days ago, I received a message from two Muslim women who said that they were denied public accommodations at a pool in Astoria because their attire, a burkini, was not deemed acceptable. They were turned away from a public swimming pool as a result. Our findings are sobering. They are troubling. They are raw. But they also illustrate what many Muslim New Yorkers have been saying for the last 2 decades and more, perhaps. Namely, that anti-Muslim racism has continued to manifest itself in subtle and overt ways, with the 21st anniversary of 9/11 coming this weekend. New York, we are better than this. Whether the bigotry is interpersonal or institutional, I know and I trust that New Yorkers of all stripes will persist in our pursuit for justice for all. It is our hope that legislators, local institutions, community organizations, and individuals will take note of the findings in this report and will work to implement the necessary changes needed to dismantle anti-Muslim racism completely so that Muslim and non-Muslim New Yorkers of all stripes can flourish together. And I believe we can. Assalamu alaikum.
Brother Ahmed was talking about curriculum and some of the stats that impact young kids. I'm going to keep pepper spraying some of these incidents so that you all remember we're talking about human beings. One time I was walking at a major retailer shop, going through the toy aisle of all places, and a father saw me in my hijab coming down the aisle, and he had a little child that was about 5-6 years old. He was buying him an army helicopter. And he bent down as he saw me coming down the aisle to that little child with the most beautiful bright eyes and a huge smile on his face. And he told his son, and we want to kill all of them, right, son? All of them. This is why we need to combat hate from a young age. This is why we need to understand its impact on society, not just for those on the receiving end, but the hatred that manifests, that evil that grows inside those that perpetuate the hate itself. Next is our esteemed public advocate, Jumani Williams, who we're very proud to have join us today. Jumani.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings to everyone, and thanks for inviting me. And I'm sorry we have to have this press conference, but I believe it's really important to have this press conference, and the findings should startle everyone. As we approach 9/11, I remember a couple of decades ago I was an organizer in what is now Little Pakistan, and I remember the devastation that occurred after 9/11. All of the Islamophobia, they almost became a ghost town in that area. And I had hoped by now we would have moved way past where we were, but we've seen so much Islamophobia, so much surveillance, and then we had a president that made it okay for it to come out of the shadows, that made it okay to hate in a way that we hadn't seen in a very long time from the largest halls of power. So I wish I could say I was surprised by what I saw. I wasn't. I was a little, because what it said is that if this is true, the majority of people in this community have felt some kind of hate. That should shock everyone. The majority of the people that were interviewed experienced hate. Over 3/4 of the women experienced hate. Almost half that wore hijabs experienced hate. Over 1/3 of children experience hate. That's not something that should be acceptable in our society. Unfortunately, we have leaders that only find it acceptable, they sometimes push it. And then we have other leaders that say they don't find it acceptable, but they try to erase the pain. I'm reminded of John Miller from the NYPD, who recently said there was no Muslim surveillance at all. How does that make a community feel that felt all the surveillance, have seen it palpable, and it was actually made quite clear that that did happen? To just pretend like it wasn't is just as dangerous as the people who are pushing it. Something else we should be very concerned about is the fact that I believe it was about 4 or 5% that people were reporting it to the NYPD. That should be scary, because the reason, as was said, that they would not report it is because of distrust of the NYPD. That does not provide safety for anyone. That means there's communities out there who are too afraid to tell the people who are paid to help protect them that something happened to them. But also what we have to talk about is if you have a population that is afraid to speak to the police, the clearance rate of crime that is solved will go down. Police literally will not be able to do their job if communities are afraid to speak to them. So not only do we have to take this report very seriously, we have to take very real steps to change it. How can we have almost 1/4 of these things happening to people at work and in school? That makes no sense at all. But sadly, it probably doesn't shock a lot of us. The Muslim community and Islamophobia is being severely underreported in terms of the mind of hate they face every single day. And I'm thankful of the recommendations that are put in this report. I'm hoping my office can do whatever it can to help get these recommendations go into place. And I'm hoping that people read this report, don't just gloss it over, but remember that at that percentage point, there's a story behind each one of those people. We want people to feel safe in school, feel safe in the workplace, feel safe in public transportation, and want them to feel safe to communicate to NYPD. That way we all are safer. So I'm sad about this report, but I want to thank CAIR for taking the time to put this together. It's now up to us to respond to it. Thank you so much.
So our brother Jamani Williams, our public advocate, spoke about 9/11. I have an imam, which is the Islamic spiritual leader of a congregation, and at our places of worship tell me he grew up in the post days of 9/11, and he was called terrorist so many times throughout his entire life. And this is a man who has dedicated himself to serving community, that it became like a nickname. It rolled off his back because it was almost daily. Now we say this and we say, oh, well, those are just individual perpetrators, but that's not true, because it's systems that allow this. Hatred doesn't happen in a bubble. So every single time a Muslim says something in Arabic or something to praise God on an airplane and they're kicked off of a flight, what do you think everybody around them is thinking in their head? That he or she is a national security threat. And that happened to this young kid being called a terrorist by peers. Why? Because school is a microcosm of what happens in the external world. So if we're allowing it in our streets and our planes, if systems are allowing this, of course we're going to see it happen in everybody's daily lives. So next is our council member, Sister Shahana Hanif.
Good morning, Assalamu alaikum everyone.
Good morning,
I'm Council Member Shahana Hanif. I'm the daughter of Bangladeshi Muslim immigrants. I was 21 years ago when 9/11 took place. My life, the lives of all Muslim youth and families changed forever. And I like to believe that this one incident was the catalyst for my drive to build Muslim power, to non-stop fight for our civil liberties, and to make sure that we are resisting, that at every juncture we are working towards a better democracy. And so before I get into the results and the recommendations, I want to underpin that over the last 21 years, the folks who are on the steps and so many others in New York City have fought to build a safer Muslim community, build leaders who understand our pains, to bring in alliances to make sure that we are part of the city's budgets, our city's legislative powers, and so much more. So I want to first recognize that while our community continues to experience the pain of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism, gendered Islamophobia, that we have always been fighting to strengthen our power and our communities and safety in our communities. I want to thank CAIR-NY and my sister Afaf, my brothers Asad and Ahmed, for this timely and urgent report. We know how critical it is. We know the anecdotes of what Muslims experience every single day, but the reporting and to ensure that we are writing down the analysis helps legislators like myself, our community-based partners, the Commission on Human Rights, city agencies, to help build out the support systems necessary for Muslims to feel safe in our city. The results of this report are harrowing, as has been mentioned by speaker after speaker. Over 60% of respondents have shared that they've experienced a bias incident. Nearly 3/4 of women have experienced hate crimes. What's shocking to me is that nearly 50% have shared that witnesses or bystanders did not step up. And that is not okay. That New Yorkers are not helping or stepping up when a Muslim is under attack. That is the message I want to get out here, that we all have a role to play here to protect one another, to make sure that we are fighting for one another. And so my commitment as a legislator, as the first Muslim woman representing in the city council, that I work my hardest to ensure that the recommendations have teeth. We've got to make sure that Muslims feel safe to report, that the reporting process is transparent, language accessible, that our schools have curriculum from a very early age so that we recognize what these structural systems like Islamophobia have done to the Muslim community, to Muslim peers. And of course, to make sure that we are expanding our partnerships with community-based organizations like CAIR-NY, like countless others who are on the steps with us today. And most importantly, to make sure that we recognize that this is simply not just a Muslim community issue. This is an issue that is compounding and hurting our Black communities, our Asian families, the surveillance that has increased in our city, whether through ICE, whether through facial recognition technology, and all other apparatuses being used to surveil, profile, entrap, intimidate us, that we have got to build solidarity among our communities to respond and to build power across the board. I'm committed to that. And one final thing, I'll say thank you to our public advocate to naming the horrific moment when John Miller, former NYPD counterterrorism chief, under my line of questioning, denied that a Muslim surveillance program took place. He has now been promoted to work at CNN. It is hurtful to see that our press outlets that are supposed to be objective are bringing on violent perpetrators like him to serve our community. It is not okay. And we will continue to fight when anything like that happens. So thank you so much. I look forward to partnering with CAIR-NY and all of our partners here. Thank you.
I want to keep things rolling because I know a few people have a tight schedule. Next on our list is Brother Hassan Naveed as the representative for the Office of Prevention of Hate Crimes, OPHC, a city agency. This is a good spot for me to just remind everybody that this survey and this work and the results of this entire research was based on funding from the city through OPHC, through AAA-NY. So we want to thank them, and we want to thank the city for providing this funding. Of course, it's only the tip of what we need, but we'll take it and we will build out from there. And that is amongst our recommendations, to fund community-based organizations who are doing this work. So Brother Hassan.
Thank you so much, Sister Afaf. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, folks. Again, I want to thank CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, Afaf, Bashar, Ahmed Mohammed, and Asad Dandia for their great work. My name is Hassan Naveed. It's spelled Hassan, last name Naveed, and I'm the Executive Director for the New York City Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. Thank you. This data, this report itself, is added value for us to be able to understand the issues that are impacting Muslims throughout the city when it comes to hate, bias, and discrimination. But what also shows in these numbers is the immense diversity of the Muslim community. South Asians, Africans, other communities, Middle Eastern folks across the city really represent in this data. But at the same time, as Sister Afaf said earlier, it's not just numbers, it's people's lives. It's folks that have been affected by hate, by bias, in places like our public transportation, in places like our schools. This report itself highlights those findings that are so important for folks like Councilmember Shahana Hanif, for our office, to be able to better refine and work towards hate crime strategies and prevention for communities itself. Listen, we cannot let this trauma, this hate trauma, impact New Yorkers, whether they are Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, or any other community itself. Myself as a Muslim public servant, as a public servant, as well as the city itself, is committed to rooting out this hate from the city. This report also continues to show that underreporting, systemic underreporting, is something that impacts vulnerable communities, Muslim communities throughout this city. And I want to state this clear. Our city wants to make sure that we can get the help that you need. I encourage you to report and call 911 when you witness or see or you believe you are a victim of a hate crime. Language services are available and your immigration status does not matter. You want to make sure that you get the help that you do. It's imperative on part of our office, of our city, for all of us to protect the diversity that really makes New York City strong. And as the council member said earlier, I was disturbed by the numbers related to bystanders who are witnessing this issue, witnessing the hate that's happening on the subways or wherever in the city. When you see something that's terrible, it is on part of ourselves as New Yorkers to protect our neighbors, our friends, our family, folks that we work with and talk to every day, no matter their race, their gender, their sexual orientation. And when you see something that happens, to make sure that you call 911, that you engage with an MTA official right away to let them know, or check in with the person about what's going on and how they want to proceed with this. It is our job to be able to root out this hate and end Islamophobia in our city. Thank you so much.
Okay, next up we will hear from our sister from Arab American Association of New York, CAIR-NY, Sister Isra Ismail. And again, that is an office that worked with OPHC to get funding for this report, so we are indebted to all of them. Sister Isra.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Isra Ismail, and I am a member of the Advocacy and Civic Engagement team at the Arab American Association of New York, or CAIR-NY. We are honored to be here today and grateful for the immense work that CAIR-New York is doing for our community. In this past year, we were able to be a small part of that work through New York City Partners Against Hate, an initiative that resources CBOs and community groups throughout the city to work with vulnerable communities to understand and prevent hate violence. We know that hate is on the rise, but for this report to lay bare just how profoundly it has impacted generations of Muslims in New York is invaluable. It is powerful. We want to applaud CAIR-New York for the scope and breadth of this project, for surfacing so many of the tensions and fears that our community lives with every day. Fear of discrimination in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our schools. Distrust of a police institution that not only fails to protect us, but has actively harmed us through surveillance and profiling. We want to give a special thanks to Afef, Asad, and Ahmed for the work you have done to create this resource. It will be invaluable for us as we continue the long, hard work of fighting for a New York that is safe, truly for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, Sister Isra. Okay, next it's my pleasure to introduce Brother Abdullah Ekel, who is part of MAS New York, the Muslim American Society, and is a sister organization to us on many of our endeavors. Brother Abdullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone, and good morning. The reality is, and something that we should really be talking about, is that Muslims on the ground know this report. They've known it for the last 21 years, and they've known it their whole lives. Being born after 9/11, I haven't experienced 9/11 like how my parents did. But what I did experience was what happened after. Whether it was in schools, in colleges, in public spaces, and even in public transportation, I felt what it means to be Muslim and to have that affirmation of faith and following Islam as the religion. And so looking at some of the next steps from this report, knowing that Muslims know this. We pass the ball back to city officials, to elected officials, to city agencies, to community partners, community-based organizations, and so many more people to really take the next step with us in terms of addressing this report and talking about some of the important next steps. Whether it's laid out in the CAIR report of language access, partnerships with community-based organizations, education, or even transparency. We want to thank CAIR-New York and the so many amazing partners and the people that were brave enough to really take this survey and talk about their experience facing some of the hate crimes here in New York City. As many of the speakers that came up before me said, New York City is not a place that accepts hate, and rather we should work towards ending all hate in New York City against all different faith communities and all communities, period. Mass New York, along with its 7 centers located across New York, wants to thank CAIR-New York once again and all the amazing community partners that came with the survey and report. And Jazakallah khairan, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Not on the speaker list, but a representative from our Assemblyman Charles Fall has come to join us, and we appreciate their presence. And I'll call my brother Guillermo Emmanuel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Guillermo Emmanuel. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff for Assemblyman Charles Fall. Unfortunately, the Assemblyman could not make it today. But I know if he was here, one thing that the Assemblyman tends to say a lot is that one act of hate against us is one too many. He would also like to thank and acknowledge the work done by CAIR-New York for this report that has come out. I hope most of you have had a chance to read it. Undoubtedly, there's evidence that shows that there continues to be a rise in hate crime that you just can't dispute. And our office, along, will continue to work with CAIR-New York and law enforcement and other agencies on Staten Island to make sure that hate crimes are no longer happening to the everyday American. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Emmanuel. Something that's been expressed before, hatred happens to the Muslim community and to many other communities. But perhaps the most structured racism that we've seen is to our Black American brothers and sisters, among which a large population are Muslim. And so it brings me a lot of pride to have some of those representatives and leaders really in the civil rights movement who have been pushing on racism way before I was even born. I would like to call now a representative from Masjid Taqwa, Brother Abdel Hakim. My brother.
Assalamu alaikum.
Good
Good morning, and thank you all for providing us with this opportunity to address the concerns of bias in our community. I want to thank CAIR personally for providing that outlet and actually bringing this to the forefront. While in our society, we have been confronted for over centuries with this underlying bias. It is not new, it has been here, and it will remain to be here until we could eliminate it. And the only way that it will be eliminated will be actually by unifying our structures and developing and actually confronting it head on. This report outlines something that we have known for centuries. Bias incidents within the Afro-American community and the Black community and community of colors have always existed. In the masjids like Masjid Taqwa, Masjid Iqwa, the area masjids in our community, these things have been going on for centuries. It wasn't until 9/11 that they brought other individuals into that scope because it was a broader perspective. Thankfully, CAIR stepped up to the plate, and as a result of it, they have reported consistently on incidents that have taken place against the Islamic community. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not teach us as Muslims to be racist or biased towards any other ethnic group. In fact, Islam is the only religion that has guided humanity to living in a sustained and sustainable society. And people act like this is not the reality. You have people like Saladin, who brought Muslims together to actually go and claim Jerusalem and did not destroy it as a result of them reclaiming it, because God had ordained for it to happen. These societies have been sustainable under all three religions, and it has been the only proof throughout the humanity of history that actually sustained itself. So truth to everything that we stand for. Islam is a religion for humanity, one that calls you to account for your hypocrisy. Again, I want to thank CAIR for the opportunity to bring that to the light. And I also want to thank Jamani Williams for providing the outlet as well, because Jamani Williams has worked alongside me for years in the trenches against issues of police brutality. And as far as NYPD is concerned, at Takwa we have developed a thing called Muslim Community Patrol. We patrol our communities. And since 2020, and the City Council has inflicted a law against law enforcement, removing the eligibility for them to be immune from committing crimes against people of color, or people in the city. They have basically fallen back. So you can call law enforcement, they will not respond. 2 weeks ago, I called law enforcement to Takwa for a bomb threat. Nobody never responded. I didn't find this surprising. We never even got a call back. Nobody from the NYPD ever came to the masjid to find out what was the results of the incident. So these are clear incidents that law enforcement has an agenda of its own. And I applaud, again, CAIR for bringing this to the forefront, and I hope that they continue to address these concerns. Thank you.
Brother Abdel Hakim. We want to bring up next our respected brother from Islamic Circle of North America, which has its own social justice wing, and that is Dr. Abdesalam Musa.
Greetings and salutations. I greet you with a universal greeting from all the prophets. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. First of all, on behalf of ICNA, we applaud CAIR for the work they've done in promoting this survey. Initially wrote something, and it would be reiterating the numbers that people have spoke on regarding what's happening in our city. However, one of the major things that I think that I need to address is the men in the Islamic community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us we are protectors and maintainers of women. So for violence and hate crimes to be perpetrated against Muslim women and we don't do nothing about it, there's something wrong with that for me. As we know, hate, biases exist and has been existing for years. And what is the root cause of it? Lack of love. And Islam teaches us to love one another. In order for us to change the narratives in this city around hate, we have to change the mindsets. We have to have more engagement between people of color, different nationalities, and different ethnic groups. If we do not do that, things will continue to be as they are. I again applaud CAIR for putting out this report, and I pray that each of you that are here who are non-Muslims will read this thoroughly and understand it and ask questions. I'm going to give you a personal story of my daughters who were 12 years old when 9/11 happened. And I didn't find out until they were 20, but they had their hijab snatched off in school. They were called terrorists. And it has had a profound effect on them today as 32, 33-year-old women. We as a people, and I'm not just saying Muslims, as New Yorkers, as citizens, in our humanity, we have to educate our people. We have to teach our children that hate has no existence in our being human. We need to be more compassionate to one another. Again, I'm going to reiterate, please read this report. It is so profound to know some of the things that go on in our city that many of us were not aware of. Me as an African American who have been on this planet for almost 80 years, has understood what biases and hate since I was a little boy. Because we're taught how to deal with the police, we're taught how to deal with people who are of another color, because this has been our experience. And as a Muslim, it is even more profound. I want to again thank everyone for allowing us, or allowing me to speak on behalf of ICNA, and I pray that all is well and we have some positive results at the end of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Musa. Dr. Musa related a story about his two daughters. Unfortunately, if you haven't been the victim of hate, you always know somebody who was, if you're a Muslim in our community. And many of them are from our own family members. My sister, who was in elementary school at the time, maybe 3rd grade when 9/11 happened, went in. And when it occurred, her teacher decided to make her the example and make her responsible for having to explain everything to the rest of her class at the tender age of 7 or whatever it was, by saying, "Hey, so-and-so, how do you feel about what happened? Can you explain?" That should never occur to a 7-year-old. And unfortunately, it was by an administrator. Step aside. 10, 15 years later, I learned a couple of years after the fact, my niece was told by her gym teacher that her religion is stupid because she doesn't wear shorts to gym class. So it seems that a lot of education needs to be happening for our educators so that we can help our young folks. Next is Sister Daphne Tamasila, who is from, again, a very powerful ally for us, and that is the Asian American Federation, AAF. Sister Daphne.
Thank you so much to CAIR-NY for inviting the Asian American Federation to be here to speak about the release of their report. Since the pandemic hit us in January 2020, the Asian community has been living in fear as we continue to grapple with verbal and physical harassment and other forms of anti-Asian violence. We feel unsafe and unheard, and we continue to be outraged. It's thanks to organizations like CAIR and all of our Hope Against Hate grantees that our communities have fierce advocates who have come together to not only collect and release important and sobering data to understand the attacks happening in our community, but to also equip our community with tools to protect themselves from this unrelenting violence. Through the Hope Against Hate campaign, we've been able to train over 2,000 community members in physical self-defense techniques, de-escalation and safety awareness techniques so that they can protect themselves and their community members. At AAF, we understand that these attacks and bias incidents have been happening to our Muslim brothers and sisters dating back to 9/11. And you've heard it already before, but from CAIR's report, we know that 64% of Muslims have experienced a bias incident or a hate crime. And that's way too many. We're proud to stand in solidarity with them today and to continue to support them as one of our Hope Against Hate partners, and we thank them for their work to provide education and resources to prevent hate crimes. Again, thank you to them for releasing this important report. As this crisis continues, we all must prioritize community safety, a shared value among all communities throughout our city. We ask our fellow New Yorkers to look out for each other. Anti-Asian violence is real and we are scared. The solution is for us to protect each other and care for each other as we continue to make real investments in our communities. Thank you.
Just as they are an ally to us, we are certainly allies to them and to all communities that face hatred, hate crimes, and bias incidents, and that is a guarantee and a promise. As we come to the near end of this, we have two more people. I want to introduce from Muslim Ummah of North America, our brother Muhammad al-Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon all. We are here in Muslim Ummah of North America, here in New York City, at the City Hall, to raise our voice against the hate crime and the bias to the Muslim community. Muslim Ummah of North America has been engaged more than a decade helping the youth community, helping their moral, social, and personal lives of the students. We also fully support what the CAIR came up with. The report itself explained enough to address this issue as of now. So we are trying to draw the attention of the authority of the city of New York to take the proper steps and take the necessary actions to solve the issues and be just to our Muslim community. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
going to read a statement from Reverend Chloe Breyer, who is the director of the Interfaith Center of New York. She tried to be here but got caught up in something else, and she requested that I read this on her behalf. It reads, "As a Christian leader doing interfaith work in New York City for more than 2 decades, I welcome CAIR-New York's outstanding report, Feeling the Hate, Bias, and Hate Crimes Experienced by Muslim New Yorkers. The depth and breadth of this report reflects CAIR-New York's longtime status as a trusted community organization within the enormously diverse Muslim communities of New York, where bias incidents can be reported without fear. The report also indicates how CAIR-New York has become an important advocate for the religious freedom rights for all New Yorkers. Not only does the report include a full portrait of Muslim New Yorkers with statistics on the disproportionately large number of engineers and business owners who are Muslim, it offers clear pictures of the way that Muslim women and men continue to be victims of bias because of their faith. The report concludes with valuable recommendations for government, schools, law enforcement, and community groups on what they can do. For these reasons, Feeling the Hate, Bias, and Hate Crimes Experienced by Muslim New Yorkers is a gift to all New Yorkers who care about religious freedom and human rights. The Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, ICNY." Again, I want to thank all of you for coming here. We need the media to amplify the voices of those that are often unable to be heard for themselves. So we thank you for your time. And to conclude, like I said, we will be here for some questions afterwards if anyone has anything to clarify. And I invite our board president, Brother Ibrahim Salam, to close us out.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. I want to thank our dear sister Afaf, our executive director, and her team, Brother Assad, Brother Ahmed, for working on this. As soon as our previous commissioner, Miller, said that there were no hate crimes, the board was insistent on pushing a report this to be made, and our executive has responded excellently. We thank them for that. We hope that all of our allies as we continue to be allies with them in hate, we at some point pray that we are allies in peace, hope, and prosperity. We thank you all for coming. CAIR-New York is here to defend not only Muslims, but all people here in New York alike against any kind of hate or atrocities that may be committed against them. Thank you all. Have a great morning. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great job.
We got to do